Couple of comfort points on CBAM. No, we have, because we have been participating so much in these global forums to measure the emission, we are set on that number of 2.2 per ton of steel, 2.2 tons of carbon per ton of steel. One distinguishing feature from CBAM compared to other emission related regulations are, at the moment, electricity related emission, which are scope 2, should not be counted when you calculate the impact of CBAM on your exports. The reason is because in EU, a compensatory mechanism exists for the electricity related emissions which are part of the electricity prices. There are no integrated plants with a captive power plant. So the electricity producer, when he produces the electricity, he buys his certificates and inbuilds into the price. The consumer of the electricity gets a state subsidy from the authorities which sell these ETS certificates. So this 2.2 first has to be revised down to exclude electricity related emissions, number one. And this arrangement is going to be undisturbed till 2030, till the time the electricity directive, which is a separate regulation, remains in place. There is a proposal to revise that as well, but that is still far off. So CBAM kicks in from 2026. Electricity, there is a talk to revise it and discuss it after 2026, and before 2030, no revision is going to take place. So this 2.2 number, so we have done some study at least for the aluminum side, but not had a chance to actually sit with a company and look at the numbers. So this will come down. As a result, at least when we see on the aluminum side, the first 2 to 4 years impact or the short-term impact when the tax kicks in is actually not so large, number one. Number two, AMN has talked about green electricity. Now the way CBAM works is, green electricity doesn't get you a credit. It is that emission which was supposed to come from a traditional electricity source is not added. But in any case today that is not added. So if adding green on your side, because we are still, I think, far off from a situation where our steel could be produced 100% from green energy. These are basically auxiliary or the support electricity. We are still driven by that captive power consumption and the grid power consumption. So from completely renewable sources manufacturing electricity, that's, I think, still a little far off. And because our grid factor compared to the European factor is still low, I think steel industry should not be raising a demand for inclusion of this scope 2 electricity. So that part of the demand or demand from the government has to be modified slightly, number one. The second point which I wanted to make with regard to CBAM is we have done a thought paper or a concept paper. CBAM has certain credit provisions of the taxes which you pay. So till now industry has talked about, let's say, renewable energy certificates which you buy or the coal cess. Coal cess is you are not going to get a credit because you get a refund on exports. So whatever you get refund gets added back in the tax computation. Renewable energy, again, non-issue because electricity is anyways not included. So our thought paper, which we have circulated internally, is instead of paying this tax to European Union by the importer, why not pay it as a carbon price adjustment on exports to EU? You can't get a transaction by transaction rebate from the government, but in the proportion the industry contributes, the government can set up that fund and give you incentive to decarbonize your plant. No? So let's say if the steel industry contributes 5,000 crores a year in terms of exports to European Union on 2 million tons of steel, that money is collected by the Indian customs. Under the CBAM provision, you get 100% credit of it. Your liability in EU becomes zero because EU is not going to pay India back the money. So Indian government collects it. Indian government sets up this decarbonization fund and helps that industry which contributed to the fund in its decarbonization effort as a tax credit, as a R&D rebates, in the income tax exemptions, etc., etc. So on and so forth. As of now, a concept paper which I wrote for a publication. Let's see how far that goes. It depends.